fine. Well, it gives me great pleasure to be asked to review this book. I'm probably, well, the only person in this hall who has read this book maybe twice. So I consider myself privileged indeed to have them be asked to come and do this review. Copies are on sale, so if you disagree with me, just buy your own copy. Okay, here we go. OPL 245 is probably the most well-known oil block to be awarded by the Nigerian government, more for the legal disputes and international arbitrations with regard to its acquisition and ownership involving the federal government of Nigeria, Shell and Malabu Oil, as well as a large cast of actors across courts in Nigeria, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Italy. Whereas OPL 245, a versatile deep-water offshore asset of the Niger Delta, was one of other similar licenses awarded to encourage indigenous participation in Nigeria's oil and gas sector. It is caught in a complex web of scandals, allegations of corruption, bribery, and so much melodrama in and out of the courtrooms. In an earlier book titled Burden of Service, Muhammed Adoke, SAN, had written, among other things, on this controversial oil prospecting license, or what is also known as Malabu Gate. In the present book, a sequel to his first book, he focuses on the OPL 245 in an extensive and comprehensive account of the allegations about his role, the burden that he has had to endure in terms of what he calls clinical persecution, or the lies and more lies, I'm quoting him, that were told against him and his eventual vindication. Adoke's OPL 245 is, by his own admission, therapeutic, a book that needed to be written to set the record straight for posterity and to clear his name through a documentation of facts and circumstances. Adoke was Nigeria's Attorney General and Minister of Justice, April 2010 to June 2015. At the time, the OPL 245 saga began in 2003. He was not yet in government, nor was he either when the block was revoked by the Obasanjo government on July 2nd, 2001, or when a settlement agreement was signed in 2006. Then when he was appointed Attorney General and Minister of Justice in 2010, OPL 245 became one of the matters he inherited as Attorney General. It was during this period that the Jonathan administration confirmed the award of OPL 245 to Malabu. This author is very clear in stating that the politicization of OPL 245 was caused by former President Olusegun Obasanjo. And I quote, who woke up one morning and set OPL 245 on fire. He revoked the block without giving any reasons, now resulting in a series of litigations involving the NNPC, Malabu, and Shell, which stalled the development of the asset. One of Adoke's first assignments as Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice was to help unpack the logjam, and he had advised that the 2006 settlement agreement was binding on the federal government of Nigeria. In the resolution agreement that was arrived at in April 2011, Shell and Nigeria Agip Exploration Limited will pay $1.3 billion into an escrow account with JP Morgan in London, while Malabu will receive $1.09 billion as compensation as full and final settlement. As the chief law officer of the Federation, Adoke was convinced that he had given the government proper advice in the circumstances, This book is about the twists and turns that we will have to deal with later. The exact nature of the burden of service that he has spoken about is laid bare in this book. On May 29, 2015, after the Jonathan administration had left office and the Muhammadu Buhari administration had been sworn in, Adoke said he received messages from those in the know that he was going to be hounded by the new government. He was in fact advised to leave town. He heeded the advice, but more specifically to proceed for further studies at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. His travails soon began. He was accused of taking a bribe of 300 million naira, $2.2 million at the time, from the OPL 245 agreement, or another 801 million, then cases of money laundering and abuse of office. Adoke insists on his innocence. Nonetheless, he remained in exile from May 29, 2015 to December 19, 2019. In between, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission filed cases against him in court. His name was mentioned in legal disputes in Italy, the US, and the UK. His apartment was raided in the Netherlands. His houses were searched in Nigeria. A warrant of arrest was issued against him internationally, leading to his arrest and detention for 35 days by Interpol in Dubai, UAE. And upon his return to Nigeria, he spent another 55 days in EFCC detention. He was even interrogated over the PNID matter, and it was not until April 2024 that he was fully cleared of all allegations of wrongdoing in Nigerian courts, resulting in his vindication. Thus, he has had to suffer for about 8 years with threats to his life and well-being. As he puts it, now I quote him, he says, when President Muhammadu Buhari came to power in 2015, he chose to come after me. Agreed that he misruled Nigeria for 8 years, but he at least got distinction in one thing, destroying my name. He turned me to the poster boy of a scandal that never was. I was arrested and detained in the UAE for 35 days. I was arrested and detained for another 55 days in Nigeria by the EFCC. Anywhere my name is mentioned today, it is Malabo and OPL 245 that usually come to mind, thanks to Buhari, who harbored a collection of bitter feelings against me for reasons best known to him. End of quote. In this book, Adoke fights back, relying on his vindication at every turn by the courts. The book is divided into 5 parts and 26 chapters. It's a cold-blooded, no-holds-barred response to everyone whom he considers as having played an unkind role in the course of his travails. This may well end up as a very controversial book, as the affected persons and institutions may seek to write their own stories, for it should not be assumed that everyone in this cast of heroes and villains will simply read the book and accept guilt. A few examples may perhaps convey an impression of this book's flavor. In chapter 5, Adoke says, former President Olusegun Obasanjo is clever by half. I'm quoting him, I'm not the one saying so. And that he owes Nigerians an apology for blatantly lying. Another quote. He says, and I quote again, Obasanjo failed the ultimate leadership test in the matter of OPL 245. He adds that, and I quote, it was disingenuous of Obasanjo to have tried to distort historical facts. On President Buhari, he observes that he, Buhari, was driven by vengeance. Vengeance for the Abacha family. He believed I was unfair to the Abachas in the OPL 245 deal. Having established what he calls intrigue and vendetta in the first part of the book, part 2, titled A Den of the Famous, is a systematic squaring of those he considers his traducers, namely President Muhammad Buhari, a friend and defender of the Abacha family, Professor John Padden, author, he says, of the shabby biography of Muhammad Buhari, Mohammed Sani or Mohammed Abacha, who claims he owns 50% of Malabu, which he did not pay for, and yet wanted a cut from the Malabu windfall. Others, who seem to have been part of the grand conspiracy against Adoke, include Professor Yemi Osinbajo and his lawyer friend Olabode Johnson, whose firm, and I quote, whose firm and partners were targeting a commission of between 5 and 35%. Mr. Abubakar Malami, Adoke's successor as AGF, UK-based Global Witness, an Italian prosecutor called Fabio Do Pasquale, Header Resource Center, a Nigerian NGO working with Global Witness, Mr. Rislanuddin Muhammed, who lied, Sahara Reporter, which Adoke calls an anything goes website, and Premium Times newspaper, all involved in character assassination and the mudslinging agenda. Chapter 8, titled The Ruthless Enforcer, is a detailed review of the role of the EFCC under Mr. Ibrahim Magu in the author's travails, what he calls the Magu pandemic. One EFCC prosecutor, Mr. Balasanga, is even dismissed as one low-life, miserable person. Adoke does not pull his punches. Large portions of this book must have been written in a fit of anger. Professor Yemi Osinbajo is labeled the conflicted Mr. Clean, that's another quote, who likes to be seen as the epitome of transparency, honesty, and accountability. Abubakar Malami is called a betrayer and a viper. The whole of chapter 10 is devoted to the antics of Malami. Olanrewaju Suraju, Header Resource Center, and Global Witness got their own thrashing in chapter 12, titled The Headless Mob. Fabio Do Pasquale is the Italian jobber whose eventual demotion by Italy's Superior Council of the Judiciary Adoke celebrates, just as he also gloat over Mr. Godwin Emefiele's travails later in the book. Death finally caught up with the hunter, Adoke writes sarcastically. Part 3 is titled Harassed and Embarrassed, 5 chapters in which the reader is taken through the author's detention in Dubai for 35 days from 12th November 2019 till 19 December 2019, when he decided of his own volition to return to Nigeria only to be detained for another 55 days in EFCC custody. Part 4, Trials and Triumphs, is a detailed report of the various cases related to OPL 245 in the United States, Italy, the UK, and the pronouncements by the courts in Nigeria. Lawyers, students of case law, prosecutors, and the general reader will find a lot that is instructive in this part of the book. The reporting is robust, the documentation is extensive and illuminating about how the path to justice may be taught to us. Justice for the accused, justice for the jury, and justice for society. It is difficult to see, however, how justice has been done to society in the case of OPL 245. Beyond the arrested development of the asset, it is curious, as this author asserts, that OPL 245 litigation was a very lucrative oil block, as lucrative as OPL 245 itself for lawyers and their allies in the Buhari administration. That is a monumental waste of resources. The book is brought to a close with reflections and recollections. Chapter 26 opens with a telling statement: I was discharged and acquitted, but the scars remain. And this is perhaps understandable given the picture of man's wickedness to man that Adoke paints, to rise to an extreme position of being the chief law officer of the Federation, only to be humiliated by, I quote again, a desperate, vicious, and ruthless government. Adoke's description of Buhari's government. There are four subtexts running through the entire book. The first is how the institutions of state, such as the EFCC and the judiciary, can be used to pursue unmitigated acts of persecution. The second is the fickleness of the human mind and this deep-seated hatred that some gnaws in their minds. The third subtext is the use and abuse of the media. And the fourth is how the treatment that people like Adoke, who serve in government, receive, discourages many other public-minded, public-spirited persons from serving their country. Over 12 years of litigation upon litigation over OPL 245 further raises questions about the quality of leadership in Nigeria. And so Adoke asks, who truly shall change Nigeria between Adoke and Buhari? Readers of this book may well find answers within its pages. The book is dedicated to all who stood by me when I was going through the darkest era of my life. My vindication is a victory for those who gave me a benefit of the doubt. This will include Ibrahim Lamode, chairman of the EFCC, who was relieved of his position a day after he insisted that Adoke was innocent. President Jonathan, whom Adoke describes as a super respecter of the law. Late Malam Abba Kyari, Chief of Staff to Buhari, Ambassador Baba Kamara, the legal team led by Chief Akanu Agabi, SAN, as well as true friends and relatives. The book ends on a note of thanksgiving as the author chooses to pray. I quote, "The Almighty, to whom all glory belongs, will reward every single person who stood by me." End of quote. The boy from Nagazi, Muhammed Bello Adoke, SAN, CFR, lawyer, now author and public intellectual, should find some healing for his scars if his story, as told here, is warmly received by those to whom it may concern. The book has strong merit.